Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
New Year's brunch at my parents' house was always the same damn thing. Champagne flutes sweating on linen napkins, polished forks we never used the rest of the year, and smiles so stiff they could slice through the glazed ham. This time, though, I walked in knowing something was about to blow. Not because anyone said anything, of course they never did, but because I had planned it that way. The way my mother kissed my cheek like I was a distant cousin, the way my father barely looked up from adjusting the thermostat, none of it was new. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that I wasn't there to play nice this time. Anna showed up 20 minutes late, like always, in a velvet green dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. She did that little fake gasp when she walked into the dining room, her eyes wide like she was stunned that people had shown up for brunch in her honor, as if this wasn't the exact same performance she gave every year. "Oh my God, everything looks amazing," she said, spinning in place like some Hallmark movie heroine. My dad practically ran over to take her coat. Mom kissed her like she was the second coming. I poured myself a mimosa and stayed in the corner, like some leftover side dish nobody asked for. I didn't hate Anna. At least, not in the way people assume sisters hate each other. It wasn't some petty jealousy thing. It was survival. When you grow up in a house where love is rationed like wartime sugar, and your sister gets the lion's share, you learn early not to ask for more. You learn to smile when it hurts, to clap when you're losing. And I learned it well. It wasn't always this way, at least not in ways you could point at. My sister was born when I was 6. At first, I was excited, told everyone at school I was gonna be a big sister. But then Anna came home and everything shifted. Mom started saying she was just so sensitive, like that excused the tantrums. Dad called her his little genius, even though she barely knew how to tie her shoes until she was 9. They coddled her, protected her, excused her. And I got chores, patience, responsibility. I was the one they could count on, which just meant I was the one who could be ignored. I remember once, when I was 11, I broke a plate trying to do the dishes after dinner. I was tired. I'd had a fever that day, but no one noticed. The plate slipped and shattered. My mom snapped, called me careless. My dad sent me to my room without dessert. Anna had drawn on the walls that same morning with permanent marker, and they called it art. Said we'd keep it up because it showed her creativity. That was the day I learned rules in our house had different names, depending on who you were. Back to brunch, Anna sat between my parents, basking in their attention. My teenage son Ethan sat quietly next to me, occasionally nudging me under the table when my face gave too much away. He knew the history, but he didn't know what was coming. Not all of it, anyway. I had shared just enough to keep him from asking too many questions. As we passed the roasted potatoes and some sort of crustless spinach quiche, my dad cleared his throat. Not the casual kind. The formal, prepared kind. I watched as he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer, the one he only wore for church and events where he had to pretend he still gave a damn. "We've got something special today," he said, smiling in that tight way he does when he's nervous but proud. He looked at Anna, and I knew the moment had arrived. She giggled. Like she didn't know. Like this was a surprise. I had seen the emails. I knew what she'd asked for. I knew what they'd promised. My mom leaned toward her like she couldn't wait to see her reaction, like she was a contestant on a game show, and this was the big moment. My father pulled out a white envelope, the kind you get when you book something expensive and official. The kind that holds life-changing papers. He handed it to Anna with a proud smile and said, "She's earned a fresh start abroad." Anna gasped. Hands over her mouth, eyes wide, voice cracking with fake gratitude. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched as she opened that envelope like it was salvation. Because I already knew what was inside. And I already knew what I had done. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I opened the laptop and found the emails. Nothing dramatic, no flickering light bulbs or thunderclaps, just the quiet hum of a cheap coffee machine and my own heartbeat in my ears. I had gone over to Mom's house to help her sort through some old holiday decorations, or at least that's what she said when she called me that morning. We weren't exactly close. Our conversations always felt like walking through someone else's house barefoot, careful where I stepped, but I went anyway. Part obligation, part curiosity, and maybe a tiny part hoping something would feel different. It didn't. She had left her laptop open in the kitchen, just sitting there next to a mug with lipstick on the rim. I wasn't trying to snoop. Honestly, I wasn't. But something caught my eye on the screen as I passed. A subject line that read Final Confirmation, Zurich. That made me stop cold. At first, I thought maybe she was booking a trip for herself and Dad, retirement goals, or some weak attempt at rekindling whatever was left between them. But then I clicked. And then I read. And then I wished I hadn't, but I kept going. The emails stretched back months. Actually, they've been emailing for over 8 months now. Well, maybe 6, but you get it, for months. I scrolled through message after message, my chest tightening with each one. My mom and Anna, planning this big international escape like it was some goddamn season finale. It wasn't a vacation. It was an exile disguised as opportunity. They were sending Anna away to get her out of the mess she'd made, the kind of mess most people don't recover from unless someone else pays the price. And guess who already had? The words started to blur together. Opportunity, distance, fresh start, keep it quiet. The tone was all gentle nudging and moral justifications, the way people talk when they're convincing themselves more than each other. They mentioned Zurich, internships, mental health breaks, and avoiding media. My stomach dropped. Because I knew what they were dancing around. I lived it. I buried it. And I didn't need it dragged back up, not like this. It had been 4 years since my ex-husband left, Ethan's father, Mark. We weren't perfect, not even close, but we had been trying, limping through counseling and shared calendars, doing the whole desperate parent routine for the sake of our son. Until the day he called me from the police station. I remember standing in the frozen food aisle with a box of fish sticks in one hand and my phone in the other, listening to Mark try to explain that Anna had said something about him, something serious. Something you don't come back from easily. At the time, I defended her. I was angry, confused, exhausted from 1,000 small betrayals in my marriage. I didn't know what to believe. But deep down, I didn't really believe it, not fully. Not the way Anna told it. Something in her voice had always sounded rehearsed, like she was just playing the role expected of her. But I said nothing. I stayed silent. And Mark lost everything, his job, his apartment, his visitation rights. Ethan stopped talking to him. And I let it happen. 2 years later, the truth started to unravel. Bits and pieces of Anna's story changed when she thought no one was listening. I overheard her one night at a party, a little drunk, laughing about how good she'd been at saving Rachel from a disaster. When I pressed her later, she shrugged, said something vague about Mark being sketchy, and that it didn't matter because no one ever liked him anyway. I asked Mom about it, told her it didn't sit right with me. She told me to let it go. That Anna meant well. That Mark probably wasn't innocent either. I didn't sleep that night. I watched Ethan sleep and wondered what kind of damage I'd allowed to grow in our home. I started replaying everything, reinterpreting every moment I had swallowed to keep the peace. I began to see Anna not as a misguided little sister, but as someone dangerous, someone who had learned from a very young age that if she cried hard enough or smiled sweet enough, someone would always clean up her mess. Usually me. But not anymore. That Tuesday, with those emails staring back at me, the decision came easily. Not out of rage, no, that would have burned out too fast. It came from the cold place, the calculating place, the part of me that had kept the score quietly for decades. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't storm out. I simply took a picture of the screen with my phone and walked to the living room, where Mom was fluffing pillows like she gave a damn about ambience. I told her I had to leave early, blamed work, kissed her on the cheek, and left without looking back. That night I stayed up late, sipping bad wine and staring at the photo on my phone, zooming in on the phrases they'd tossed around like confetti. Deserves a new life. Let her go in peace. Don't involve Rachel, she wouldn't understand. Oh, but I did understand. I understood better than anyone what it felt like to be erased. I had been the cleanup crew for years. The witness. The scapegoat. Not this time. So, I bought a gift for Mom. And I wrapped it myself. Anna had always been able to cry on command, but this time she didn't have to. She clutched that thick, white envelope like it held the cure to every mistake she'd ever made, like the past could be folded into tidy corners and zipped inside a carry-on. She looked at Dad with wide, grateful eyes, the kind you usually only see in commercials for airline loyalty programs or overly sentimental greeting cards. Then she threw her arms around his neck, sobbing the kind of tears that make people think they've done something noble. My father, for his part, just closed his eyes and smiled, proud of himself for once again doing what he always did best, fixing problems with money instead of apologies. I didn't clap. I didn't lean in. I didn't even look surprised, because you can't fake shock when you already know the script. Instead, I glanced at Ethan, who gave me the slightest tilt of his head, the same signal we used when he was little to mean you okay. I nodded back, just once, and turned to sip my mimosa, which I'd made stronger than usual because I knew I'd need it. My mother was busy dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a napkin, making a show of being overcome while pretending not to smirk. She always had a weakness for symbolic gestures, the kind of gifts that came with a story she could retell at book clubs and backyard potlucks. She looked across the table at me, almost remembering I existed, and smiled like she expected some kind of approval. I gave her nothing. Just a calm expression, practiced for years, and then I reached under the table and brought out her gift. It was wrapped carefully, with cream-colored paper and a red ribbon that matched the flowers in the centerpiece. I slid it across the table toward her without saying a word, letting the weight of the moment land how it wanted. She looked at it like she hadn't expected anything at all, which made me want to laugh. Of course she didn't. She never thought I'd bring more than dessert. Never thought I'd care enough to do something like this. That was always her mistake, confusing silence for absence and politeness for permission. She peeled back the wrapping with slow, delicate fingers, like she was afraid it might explode. Inside was a leather-bound photo album, thick and heavy with gold-trimmed pages. Her smile returned quickly, trained and proper, the same one she used when pastors came over or when someone complimented her pie crust. "Oh, Rachel," she said, holding it like a newborn, "this is beautiful." I nodded and kept my eyes on her face because I knew what was coming. She opened the album and saw the first page, a picture of us at the lake house, the summer before Anna was born. I was 6. Grinning with missing teeth and holding a popsicle in one hand. Mom smiled at that one. Then came more photos, Christmas mornings, Halloween costumes, piano recitals. All the normal, curated snapshots of a family that wanted to look whole. But scattered in between were other things, little pieces that didn't belong, copies of old notes I'd written in frustration, cards where my name had clearly been added after the fact, birthday photos where I stood on the edge of the frame, always smiling but never centered. She slowed down, her fingers hovering over each image like she wasn't sure how it got there. She reached the photo of Anna's 16th birthday, balloons, cake, a car in the driveway, and beside it, a printout of the receipt from the used bookstore where I'd bought my own birthday gift that same year. She blinked. Her mouth twitched. Ethan watched her with a stillness that reminded me of his father. He didn't say anything, didn't look away. He just watched her come to terms with the quiet revision of her own history. It wasn't enough to accuse. That wasn't the point. The point was to hold up a mirror. She flipped through more pages, each one packed with a contrast, pictures of Anna winning awards, next to an email I'd sent Mom asking if she could come to Ethan's school play, and her one-line reply, "Sorry, busy that night. Anna has dress rehearsal." Pages filled with moments she had no reason to remember, but I had no right to forget. And on the very last page, tucked neatly into the leather pocket usually meant for memorabilia, was the printed email, just one, from her conversation with Anna. The one that sealed it all. The subject line, "She won't know. Rachel never makes a fuss." She stared at it like it wasn't real, like it might vanish if she blinked hard enough. Her hand hovered above it, then slowly lowered. She didn't read it aloud. Didn't need to. The weight of those words was enough to push all the air out of the room. I could feel it shift, like someone had opened a door to a place we all pretended didn't exist. Her eyes lifted, and they found mine across the table. That polished, public smile of hers didn't quite hold. It cracked, just slightly, around the edges. Her lips parted like she might say something, an excuse, maybe, or a denial, but nothing came out. Not right away. I sipped my mimosa, calm and steady, the bubbles loud in my ears. Ethan reached over and took my hand under the table. Not tightly, not urgently. Just there. Steady. Mom finally spoke, her voice soft and trembling. "Why would you do this now?" And I smiled for real this time, not cruelly, but honestly. Because she still didn't get it. She still thought this was about timing. Like there had been a better day to ask why your mother never really loved you the same. I didn't answer her. I didn't owe her that. I just let her sit there, fingers frozen on the page, face pale under her perfect makeup, as everything she thought she controlled slowly unraveled. Her eyes locked with mine. I said nothing. I sipped my mimosa. The thing I did wasn't glamorous or loud or cinematic the way revenge is always painted in those late-night TV dramas where broken women finally rise up in slow motion. It didn't involve police sirens or courtrooms or screaming matches under a pouring sky. It was quieter than that. Quieter and maybe even crueler, because it came from the kind of pain that doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just sits in your bones for years until you finally decide to stop pretending it doesn't hurt. Back then, when it all started, Ethan was 12 and small for his age, the kind of quiet, thoughtful boy who asked questions grown men were too afraid to say out loud. He and Mark had just started talking again, slowly, carefully, like people afraid of breaking something they weren't sure could be fixed. I remember picking Ethan up from Mark's apartment one Saturday afternoon and hearing them laughing about old video games, like they'd time-traveled back to a version of our lives when things weren't so sharp around the edges. I remember thinking maybe, just maybe, we could be one of those rare divorced families that made it work without eating each other alive. Then Anna came home from college for winter break. She was 21, newly heartbroken, and already halfway into a bottle of wine when she cornered me in the kitchen and said something wasn't right about Mark. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with the practiced tremble of someone who knew which strings to pull. She said she'd seen things, that Ethan had told her something during a car ride last summer, and that she wasn't sure what to do, but thought I should know. She played it vague at first, letting the suggestion hang in the air like a fog, but within a few days the story crystallized into something darker, something far more damaging than I had braced for. When I asked Ethan, gently, quietly, the way you do when you're scared of the answer, he looked at me like I'd grown a second head. He had no idea what I was talking about. I pressed, hoping I'd misheard Anna, or misunderstood her wording, or dreamt the whole thing, but he just shook his head and asked if he was in trouble. That's when the floor started to tilt beneath me, when the air turned too thin to breathe, and my instinct wasn't to run toward the truth, it was to protect my son, no matter what that meant. I didn't confront Mark right away. I watched him. I listened. I waited for any hint that something Anna had said could be real, but there was nothing. No red flags. No sudden confessions. Just a confused, tired man trying to be a part of his son's life again, barely holding on to that thin thread we'd all but severed years ago. But the damage had already been done. Mom believed Anna instantly. She didn't ask for details. Didn't want context. Just closed her eyes, nodded slowly, and said those 4 words that hit me harder than any slap. She wouldn't lie. Rachel. That was it. That was the trial, the sentence, and the execution all in one breath. When I tried to push back, asked if maybe Anna had misunderstood something, Mom went cold. "You're defending your ex over your own sister," she said, her mouth hard as stone. I wasn't defending anyone. I was just trying to figure out what the hell had happened. But I didn't push. Not then. Because by the time I realized how deep the lie had already sunk its claws, Mark had lost his job due to a confidential tip, and Ethan started crying himself to sleep without telling me why. My friends whispered about me behind my back. I could feel it. A few neighbors stopped making eye contact. Mark moved 2 states away, and though he never blamed me, I could hear the distance in his voice every time he called. He stopped asking to see Ethan after a while. Stopped calling altogether. I gave up the possibility of repairing anything with him. I let myself become the mother who had chosen her sister, even though all I'd ever done was freeze. I walked away from a relationship that still had pieces worth saving because I couldn't bear to make the wrong move. I let Ethan think things were just complicated, while the truth sat like a splinter under the skin of our lives. It wasn't until 2 years later, in a half-drunken haze at a birthday party for some mutual friend, that I heard Anna bragging in the kitchen. She didn't know I was standing outside the doorway. She didn't know I could hear her telling some guy that she'd totally saved her sister from being stupid, that she just said enough to make people listen, and that if Mark had been more likable, no one would have questioned it anyway. I stood there for 5 full minutes, my drink sweating in my hand, my jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. I never told Mom. I didn't send the recording I took that night. I didn't even bring it up to Anna, because I knew it wouldn't matter. The lie had already served its purpose, and the truth wouldn't erase the cost. Instead, I waited. And then, a few weeks ago, I found the final piece. While scrolling through Mom's email that day, I found the one Anna had sent with the subject line, "Just wanted to say thank you." Inside, she'd confessed everything in the vaguest, most self-serving way possible. "I know I went too far," she wrote, "but it felt like the right thing at the time." And then, the worst line of all, "I still think Rachel will be better off." So I printed it, tucked it into the photo album, right there next to the receipt from the bookstore and the forgotten birthday photo. It wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. One they couldn't smash. One they'd have to live with. Now, back at the table, Mom is still holding the album like it might shatter in her hands. Her voice comes out small, a whimper more than a whisper. "She was just a child," she says, as if that explains everything. And I look at her, calm and tired and done with pretending. So was I say. And so was Ethan. Anna was still glowing, wrapped in the warm, indulgent spotlight that had followed her since childhood, that invisible light that seemed to dim everyone else in the room. She had no idea that the air around her was shifting, had no sense that the laughter echoing off the chandelier had started to sound just a little too hollow. She was still showing the ticket to Zurich to anyone who would look, talking about chocolate and cobblestones and how she'd finally get to start over in a place where nobody knew who she was. The irony, of course, was lost on her completely. My father, for his part, looked pleased but detached, like he always did at moments that required actual emotional investment. He sat at the end of the table with his hands folded politely in his lap, glancing around like he was trying to gauge whether it was safe to go back to his office or maybe sneak away to the garage to check the thermostat again. He was never one for conflict, never raised his voice, never stood in the way, never stood up unless it was for a toast or to leave the room. And then there was Linda, my mother, sitting stiller than I'd ever seen her, her hand resting on the closed photo album like it was a dead animal someone had left on her plate. Her face, usually so curated and composed, had gone oddly blank, drained of color, like she had just remembered something terrible and was trying not to let it show. She hadn't read the whole letter, I was sure of that, but she'd read enough. Enough to connect the dots. Enough to know that whatever story she'd been telling herself for the last 4 years was no longer safe inside its own walls. She folded the letter without looking up, slowly and deliberately, like folding it made it less real. She didn't speak. Not yet. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush in to fill the silence. I let it breathe. I let it sit there like a loaded gun on the table, waiting to see if anyone would be brave or stupid enough to reach for it. Finally, I leaned back in my chair and spoke, not loud, not sharp, but clear enough for every person at that table to hear it echo. Funny how some lies come with first-class tickets, I said, watching Anna out of the corner of my eye as she slowly turned her head toward me. Others come with silence. There was no anger in my voice, not anymore. Just fatigue, laced with something deeper. Something finished. Ethan looked at me then, his face unreadable, but his hand found mine again under the table. He didn't say much during these kinds of things, but he always knew when the ending had arrived. "Can we go home now?" he asked, not in a whiny or impatient way, but in the voice of someone who's already accepted that nothing good is coming next. I nodded once, pushed my chair back slowly so the legs wouldn't scrape. I could feel every eye on me, though no one dared say a word. I gathered my coat, took my time fixing the collar, and gave Ethan a little motion with my chin that meant, "Go ahead to the car." He didn't hesitate. Just walked out the front door and down the steps without looking back. Anna stood when she saw I was leaving. Her voice cracked slightly, high and defensive, like she already knew she was losing control of the narrative, but hadn't figured out how to stop it yet. "Rachel, wait," she said, stepping toward me like she could still fix this with a hug or a tearful apology or whatever performance she thought would work this time. "You don't understand what it was like." I didn't let her finish. I turned and looked her dead in the eyes with the calm of someone who had waited long enough. "You'll be fine," I said. "They always forgive you." And then I walked out. The cold air outside was sharp and honest in a way the house had never been. It hit my face like truth. I got into the driver's seat, started the car, and glanced in the rearview mirror just once to see the front door still open and my mother still sitting at the table like a statue who'd just been told she was no longer sacred. We drove in silence for a few blocks before Ethan finally asked, "Do you think they'll call?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes, just to keep things clean. But I didn't. "No," I said. "I don't." The houses rolled past in blurry shapes, all dressed in leftover tinsel and January exhaustion, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, exactly. Not even justice. Just stillness. Like I had finally stopped running. We pulled into our driveway, and I let the engine idle a moment longer than necessary, staring at the quiet street, at the bare trees scratching the sky. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, trying to understand if what I'd done had been revenge, or just the truth finding its way out. Was it punishment or protection? Justice or a final act of self-respect? I still don't know. But I never heard from any of them again.